Julie Wafay. Now she's Julie Angus, the Mrs. in the Mr. and Mrs. Daredevil Act, which is Colin and Julie Angus. You can pick this book up in the bookstore. His achievement was this epic 2-year circumnavigation of the globe under human power. And hers was to be the first woman who rowed across the Atlantic from mainland to mainland. Colin actually was with us a couple of years ago. He spoke at Idea City 2009, and Julie, luckily, is with us today. Julie.
Thanks, Moses. Thanks. I'm really excited to be here at Idea City this year, and thanks to Moses and his crew for inviting me. And it's a privilege to be included in this group. Greg and Martin are very inspirational people. I love how Idea City started off this year with Matt Ridley's talk on optimism, and I think that's a really important perspective to have, especially when we're talking about the environment, because there are so many things to celebrate, so many successes that we've had in preserving our environment. But at the same time, being vigilant about environmental stewardship is essential to our health for the planet as well as our health for society. And so often when we think about places that we want to protect and preserve, it's the park in our backyard or the river that runs through a nearby forest. It's the places that are out of sight are the ones that perhaps aren't at the forefront of our thoughts. And that's the problem with the ocean. It covers almost 2/3 of our planet, yet most of it we will never see. But it is a part of our environment that's facing threats from a number of different areas: acidification, pollution, overfishing, global warming. And so when I first thought about rowing across the Atlantic Ocean, that was one of the things that appealed to me, this idea that I would have the opportunity to visit this very remote environment, that I would experience it in this incredibly intimate way, slowly traveling across it, being powered just by the strength of my own arms and legs. And now, I didn't grow up as an adventurer. I didn't even play table tennis. In fact, my parents were very overprotective. I was an only child. They were always worried that I would hurt myself. So the only trophies I brought home were for math contests. Nonetheless, my parents instilled in me this curiosity about my surroundings and this belief that I should pursue that curiosity. And so that led to, first of all, a career in science. And well, then it led to this, which they were far less happy about. And when I first decided that I wanted to row across the Atlantic Ocean and to do something that no woman had done before, there were lots of reasons why I couldn't do it or shouldn't do it, and probably at the forefront was the fact that I couldn't row. But you know, whenever there's a hurdle, there's a way to get over that. And I spent a year training, rowing with the Vancouver Rowing Club, first learning how to row and then building up my endurance, and then gaining all the skills necessary to cross an ocean, which is a lot, learning about offshore travel. And at first I wanted to travel with a friend of mine, Kathy, but she changed her mind, and instead I traveled with my boyfriend at the time, husband now, Colin. And now, there are lots of reasons why you might not choose to row across an ocean with the person that you love. First of all, your boat is very small. The cabin that you're in is about the size of your kitchen table. So imagine crawling underneath your kitchen table with your significant other and staying there for 5 months. Colin was on an expedition traveling around the world at that time, so what I did is I flew to Moscow with my bicycle and I cycled with him from Moscow to Lisbon, Portugal, and that's where our row would start. So the type of rowboat that we used is, it's quite different from, you know, your dory-style boat. It's especially made for ocean rowing. It's got a few special features, like it's got a waterproof cabin, it's self-righting, so if you do capsize, theoretically, the boat should right itself. It has solar panels, it has a lot of storage, and of course it has 2 rowing seats and a few pairs of oars. And the route that we would follow was from Lisbon, Portugal to Limon, Costa Rica. It's an enormous distance, almost 10,000 kilometers. There's lots of things to take into consideration, such as weather and the hurricane season. So there's a lot of planning that went into this. And when we finally left on September 22nd, it was so exciting to be on the ocean. All this planning was behind us, and suddenly we had this huge adventure in front of us. And we just had to row, and we had this physical challenge. And that feeling of elation lasted for about 2 hours. And then we moved away from the shelter of the shore, and the huge swell of the ocean started lifting and lowering our boat. And, I felt horribly seasick. And it was very difficult getting used to life on the boat. And that first night, seeing the lights of Lisbon fade away and knowing that we would be alone in this boat until we crossed the Atlantic Ocean was terrifying. And slowly we got used to life on the rowboat. And a typical day on the rowboat is you row for 2 hours, and then your partner rows for 2 hours. And you do this all day. So you're rowing 12 hours a day, 24 hours a day in total. The boat is being rowed. When you're not rowing, you're in the cabin. You're making meals. You're navigating. You're taking pictures, video, all sorts of other things. We had pretty good food, actually. A large part of that due to the fact that we fished. This is dorado, also known as mahi-mahi, very delicious fish, very easy to catch when you're in a rowboat because they swim underneath your boat. Of course, we don't have a fridge when we're on the rowboat, so we would dry any fish that we couldn't eat. But there were challenges right off the bat, and one of the most difficult moments, one of many, happened just a few days out, and that was where we almost got hit by a freighter. And I'll show you that in the next video clip.
I looked inside and I saw that all I saw was the side of the freighter. There was a foot away.
So the problem with being in a rowboat, and especially when the weather turns bad, is you're inside the cabin, there's huge waves around you, and although you're looking out to see that there's no traffic, the waves are so big that you can't see very far. So we actually didn't see the boat until it was right on top of us almost. It was a collision course, and it was just the bow wave of the freighter that pushed us aside, and we carried on. And slowly we were making our way across the Atlantic, and the weather improved, and we were out there rowing, and it became quite calm and enjoyable, and then the weather changed, and it got a little bit less enjoyable. And we had a satellite phone, so I called my parents. I called my dad quite regularly because he was really worried about me, understandably. And this one time I called him, and I said, "Oh, Dad, everything's okay." And he said, "No, Julie, it is not okay. I just heard on the radio that a hurricane formed on the part of the ocean that has never before had a hurricane, exactly where you are." And at first, I didn't believe my dad. I thought that he must be mistaken. So we called the National Hurricane Center in Florida. And indeed, he was right. It was Hurricane Vince, the most northern, the most eastern hurricane ever to form, the first hurricane that would hit Spain. And it had formed just a few hundred miles away from us, and it was tracking towards us. And those were terrifying days. The waves, which were maybe about 5 feet at that time, doubled to 10 and then to 20, eventually 40, 50 feet. Winds were screaming at over 100 kilometers an hour. You can't row in conditions like that. We didn't know didn't know if we would make it. That was a concern. No rowboat has ever gone through a hurricane as far as we knew. So we prepared the boat as best as we could, and then we climbed inside our cabin, which is very small, underneath the kitchen table, and it's all padded, and we just braced ourselves, and we spent 3 days in there. The waves would hit our boat, and I would roll onto its side, and we would just brace ourselves, trying not to injure ourselves. We couldn't eat, we couldn't drink, couldn't sleep. And eventually the weather subsided, and Vince passed over us, and we were out there rowing again. And we thought, well, that's it. We've gone through a hurricane and a rowboat. It's just going to get better after this. We can't have anything worse than that. Well, lo and behold, it was the worst hurricane season in history. It was the year of Katrina. There were more hurricanes than any other year, most intense storms, and quite a few unusual storms. And so we did, in fact, get hit by a second hurricane. But the good thing about going through one hurricane is you learn a few things. And in this video clip, I'll demonstrate one of those lessons.
Well, we've got another hurricane coming towards us, and we've done everything we possibly can to prepare the boat. We've battened down the hatches, we've secured down loose gear, tied everything, screwed down the hatches inside the cabin, and now it's just a waiting game. And the biggest danger as the boat does roll is getting slammed into the walls, and in order to and getting broken bones or even head injuries. To protect our heads, we've actually fastened helmets, which we've made from pantyhose, and we've stuffed the interior with clothing. And so if we do end up banging our heads against the wall, it will actually protect us somewhat, much better than not having anything at all.
So it always seems like I'm talking about the scary moments of this trip. My book was called Rowboat in a Hurricane, but the actual reason that we go out there and explore is for the other times, to experience the environment and to enjoy the wildlife that we see. And that was probably one of the most special things about the Atlantic Ocean, is the wildlife that we experienced. And it was really phenomenal. I mean, we didn't know how many marine mammals or fish we would see before leaving, but we saw quite a few whales. They would surface near us and then submerge and swim underneath the boat. Quite a few turtles as well. Most of them were quite shy, but we had a couple guys that were pretty big and loved the barnacles growing on the hull of our boat. It's a little salad bar. Flying fish are amazing. It is incredible to watch a school of flying fish come out of the water and take to the air and just soar for 50 feet through the air. And of course, birds like the magnificent frigate bird as we approached land, and a few other types as we were farther out at sea. But my favorite animal of all was these little fish. They're called triggerfish, and they followed our boat for thousands of kilometers. Sometimes we had maybe about up to 100 fish following us, but we had this one little core group that followed us from close to the beginning, and we named them Ted, Fred, Ned, and Oscar. And we would feed them scraps from our food, little oatmeal left on the plate after breakfast, and they became pretty special to us. The thing about going on a journey like this, about taking on a challenge that really pushes your boundaries, about following your dream, is that sometimes people will say what you're doing is impossible. And, you know, Greg mentioned that in his presentation. And I faced this as well before leaving on this expedition. And I'm just going to show you a video clip of one of those examples.
Month since we've been out at sea, and things are going quite well. We're in the waters of the Canary Islands, but it seems many people didn't think we would even make it this far. What I have in front of me is a letter from the Ocean Rowing Society. It's actually from the president of the Ocean Rowing Society, Kenneth Crutchlow. And according to this letter, he certainly didn't seem to think we would make it. He didn't seem to think I would make it in particular. Today I read the website of your guys. It says Julie wants to be the first woman to row from mainland to mainland. Does she have any idea how hard that will be and how long it will take? We do not know each other. It is my style to be direct and not to beat about the bush. What your crew is suggesting doing is way out there at the limits of physical endurance. I do not get the feeling they really know what they are getting into. It seems they are prepared to arrive in Portugal, load a few tins of beans on the boat, and away.
I like beans.
To be honest, I do not get the feeling the row is well planned and properly equipped. If you are not properly funded and equipped, don't leave. Go home. Kenneth Crutchlow, president of the Ocean Rowing Society, showing his support for our row across the Atlantic Ocean.
I mean, the thing about his letter is he didn't know anything about me. He didn't know the training that I had undergone. He didn't know anything about the state of our boat. So he wasn't in a situation to make that call, whereas I was. I knew about all the preparations we'd done, and I was fairly certain that I had the skills to achieve this. So by the time we got near the end of our row, Limon, Costa Rica, we had been out on the ocean for 5 months. We had celebrated my birthday, Colin's birthday, Christmas, New Year's, Valentine's Day, Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving. It was a long time to spend out in the ocean. 5 months without any cold drinks, without any fresh food. We were pretty excited to finally make it into shore. And those last few days rowing into Limon were extraordinarily difficult because we had a 2-knot current against us, which is about as fast as you can row. So that meant when I was rowing, the boat would stay stationary. When Colin was rowing, the boat would stay stationary. It was only when we were both rowing that we would make any progress. So this meant we were rowing each 18 hours a day, and we were barely moving forward. It was very disheartening. We thought we might not reach land, but finally we broke through the current and we rowed that last leg into Costa Rica, and we stepped on shore. And that was an incredible feeling. And then I realized that I couldn't walk. Not only had, my leg muscles atrophied, but I didn't have any balance. Whenever I walked, it looked like I'd been on a bender. And anyways, we finally got our walking legs, and then we got our cycling legs, and we hopped on our bikes, and we rode our bikes from Costa Rica back home to Vancouver, which is just over 8,000 kilometers, and finished the expedition. And this last video clip is the last day of the expedition.
Homeward bound.
It feels incredible. This is the last leg. We're about 8 kilometers away from the finish line. We've got all these wonderful people that have come out and joined us for the final moment.
It feels completely amazing to have 43,000 kilometers behind us and about 5 ahead of us.
It was an amazing feeling completing the expedition. We had learned so much about ourselves and about the environment that we traveled through. We learned that we got along quite well and ended up getting married. But when we finished this expedition, people would ask, well, what could you possibly do next? What could be more challenging, require more planning, more dedication than that? And well, so now that we have Leaf, I think more than ever we realize the importance of environmental stewardship and ensuring that he can explore the world just as we did and have a wonderful place to call his home. And we're not waiting too long to take him adventuring. We're actually leaving in August. We're going on, our next trip is a sailing trip. We're traveling from Spain to the Middle East to retrace the route of the Phoenicians, their maritime routes, and explore how they brought the olive tree from the Middle East throughout the Mediterranean. And we'll be leaving on that in August. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Moses.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me take a picture. Amen.